All right, welcome everybody. Um, Thanks for joining us today for today's webinar in the Land Manager Leadership Series. I'm Kelsey Virgin. I'm a project manager with the Wallace Center who is hosting this webinar today. In this series, we feature seasoned public land managers utilizing grazing as a management tool to share their successes, challenges, and everything in between to hopefully inspire and empower fellow land managers and stewards. Today, we are excited to have Erin Grossman from Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources joining us. And to start us off, I'm first going to go over some logistics for the webinar today. I'll talk briefly about the Wall Center and Pasture Project, and then we'll get into our presentation and we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for your questions at the end. In terms of Zoom technology, I believe we're all pretty familiar with it at this point, but we do ask that you keep yourselves muted during the presentation, but you should feel free to put questions in the chat box as you have them. We'll have some time at the end of the presentation to address them, but feel free to put your questions in as you have them so you don't lose track. If you're having any technical difficulties, also feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll do what we can to help you out. And of course, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the Pasture Project YouTube channel in the coming week. All right, so some introductions. So Wallace Center works nationally to bring together diverse people and ideas to co-create solutions that build healthy farms, equitable economies, and resilient food systems. Our vision is that all communities have the power to nourish themselves and regenerate ecosystems through just food and farming systems. At the heart of these systems are dynamic networks of people connected through interdependent relationships with each other and the land. Pasture Project is an initiative of the Wallace Center that works to advance and integrate regenerative grazing as a scalable, market-driven solution for building healthy soil, viable farms, and resilient communities in the upper Midwest, and specifically in a 6-state region in the upper Mississippi River Basin, although we do work with some national audiences. The Pasture Project provides farmers, grazers, land managers, and others with a data-backed case for the economic, environmental, and social benefits of implementing regenerative grazing. We continue to build a strong alliance of partners for supporting regenerative grazing and other regenerative management practices across the Mississippi River Basin. And since 2014, we've been championing the use of conservation grazing on public land as a tool in the toolbox for managing public grasslands. So what is conservation grazing? So I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but just so we all are on the same page, conservation grazing is a type of managed grazing, and it has the potential to mimic some of the positive impacts of historical native herbivores such as deer, elk, and possibly bison on grassland ecosystems. Rotating livestock through paddocks via conservation grazing can create beneficial disturbance if done with the right seasonality, intensity, and extent, and followed by adequate periods of rest and recovery for the soil and plant communities. Well-managed grazing on publicly managed grasslands has shown to provide both environmental and economic benefits. Manure left behind by cattle improves soil health by supporting soil microorganisms as well as insects that can increase the food resources for games and birds. Grazing can increase the structural diversity of grassland plant communities, which benefits a host of organisms. Conservation grazing on public lands is a flexible tool that can be custom to meet a variety of objectives, including maintaining and improving habitat for wildlife species, specific plant communities, and recreational opportunities. Conservation grazing on public lands can be a win-win for livestock and wildlife. So if you'd like to learn more about our grazing work, you can visit pastureproject.org, or for more of our other initiatives at the Wallace Center, please visit wallacecenter.org. All right, so I'm going to intro our presenter for today. So we're thrilled to have Erin Grossman with us. So Erin, after attending the University of Wisconsin River Falls, where she earned her BA in biology, she spent 6 years as a limited term employee in several areas of Wisconsin. After a brief 3 months at Pheasants Forever Farm Bill biologist, Erin was hired as a full-time Wisconsin DNR wildlife technician in central Wisconsin, primarily working in Portage County. This is where Erin encountered the concept of grazing public lands for the first time in Wisconsin. Erin spent 10 years in that wildlife technician position before accepting her current position as a Wisconsin DNR wildlife biologist. When not at work, Erin enjoys hiking, skiing, reading, and training her young bird dog. So thank you for presenting today, Erin. We really appreciate you bringing your expertise and perspective, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kelsey. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm not good at multitasking, so I'm going to share my screen here. All right. If someone could, Kelsey, if you could let me know.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, cool. So again, thanks everybody for having me. I'm going to jump right in. I was just thinking before this presentation, it has been almost 10 years to the year. This summer it'll be 10 years since I started down this path of really looking at grazing as not just a putting cattle out there, but in terms of what really can it do to benefit the habitat that we're working on here. All right, so where I am, I'm in Wisconsin, central Wisconsin specifically. I just call it a journey. For me, started in Portage County, which is that northeast dark shaded county, and then specifically on Buena Vista Wildlife Area. Buena Vista and Leola are adjacent properties that are primarily managed. They are managed for grassland habitat management. They are home to Wisconsin's only population of greater prairie chickens, which is a state threatened species, and a suite of other threatened species of special concern, especially those grassland species of special concern: upland sandpiper, short-eared owl, and a whole suite of other little brown birds, as we affectionately call them. So that's kind of setting the scene for where we are. I started there in 2008. And that was my, as Kelsey said, introduction into conservation or grazing on public lands. These properties had a long history. They'd been grazing for decades prior to my arrival. All of that was, to my knowledge, all of that was continuous grazing where the animals would come on in spring, graze the entire pasture, and then they'd come off, in that October timeframe, somewhere in there. Around 2013, 14, we were looking for additional ways to manage. That property was about 14,000 acres to manage this large grassland property, fairly contiguous grassland. So that was a really helpful aspect of this, to provide greater flexibility, different reactions. And to be honest, we had been receiving a little bit of outside pressure from others to do things differently. Like what we're doing isn't having an impact, do things differently. So outside pressure is not always comfortable, but in this case, it really did kind of push me to think of things in different ways. Maybe not how those putting the pressure on wanted me to think about them, but it resulted in what I think is a really cool project, and I'm grateful for that pressure. So like I said, we weren't looking to replace any management techniques. I just wanted to add something to our continuous grazing. And I'd been learning more about this thing called rotational grazing. So that was the start to create, improved habitat for all these grassland species. And also we're in a very agricultural area of Wisconsin. And so improving those relationships with our neighbors, with those in that community, was also important to myself and the department. So our primary goal, and Kelsey actually talked a lot about this, was, big picture. I wanted to improve that grassland habitat for wildlife. We use greater prairie chicken as our keystone species. So, increase grass forb diversity. Grassland birds don't necessarily care about the species that are present. They really care about the structure, the density, and we have a wide variety of birds that have different habitats that they prefer. So they don't all want really thick, really dense litter. So providing those differences for all the species that are present on the property. And then also to figure out, well, can we reduce the amount of chemical we're applying to the landscape? Can we reduce the amount of mechanical treatments we're doing on the property as well? So like I said, in the beginning, they'd been grazing for decades using high tensile electric fence. So we knew how to set up the fence. I learned from staff that had been there previous to me. There was some overlap, how to set up high tensile fence, how to set up energizers. We used water holes, how that worked. So that was not really new for us, and it was not new for the community either. So to encounter electric fences on public land was not new. So that was kind of old hat. What we didn't know was how to, like this new thing, rotational grazing, how to implement that. And most importantly, and kind of the biggest gap for me was how do you find somebody that'll do this and that will do a good job, considering I didn't know the ins and outs at that time. So around that 2013-14, I started attending some pasture walks and trainings. Most of those trainings were attended by some federal staff, some state staff, county staff. Pasture walks were more, that's where I met more of the practitioners that were implementing the grazing on their home farms. So logistics are logistics, but for me, this how do you find somebody? That was the biggest question. Luckily, at one of the pasture walks I went to, there was an individual there who also worked for government. He was a county grazing specialist, had his own herd, talked with him, and that's kind of how things started. He was game to try anything, we'll just put it that way, and he was willing to work with us. He was willing to teach us, which was a really big it was a really big deal for me because I didn't just want to have another grazer on the property. I wanted to be better able to talk to the grazers that we were currently working with already and be more confident that I knew what I was talking about, know the language, so to say. So that was a really big win. We both approached this very much as a partnership. If we fail together. If we succeed together. So that was kind of our mentality. Very open dialogue. He was the grazing expert. I was the habitat expert. So we worked as best as we could to kind of use both of our expertise to make this successful and to reach my objectives, the department's objectives for this property, which is, I will say that is the key for us on public lands is we're not maximizing forage here. We're not maximizing production. We want grazers to be successful, but we want our habitat objectives met. Like that's key for us. So let's see. We had that. So together, like this started in 2014, we talked about where we would graze. We settled on daily moves. He helped us figure out the watering system and some of the engineering about that. He helped install some of the fence. So it really, from the get-go, started out as a partnership, which now getting on 10 years later is pretty unique, in my opinion. Sometimes that mutual trust can be tricky, hard. And I was thinking back, and frankly, I think I was quite spoiled with this first partnership on this grazing. But I gleaned so much from it, and the value is basically helped me through the last 10 years and the rest of my career. So that for me, that was the one biggest hurdle is the who am I gonna get? And I really lucked out. The project that we decided on was 320 acres, half mile by a mile. The vegetation in this half section was pretty representative of what the property had on it as a whole. Smooth brome, we're not dealing with more in-season natives here. We are a surrogate grassland. This area used to be tamarack swamp, and it got ditched and planted to bluegrass, and that's what we're dealing with. There's a lot of smooth brome, aspen coming in, some areas of willow coming in. Did I say goldenrod? Common goldenrod, which is a native, but it can tend to take over, especially in our slightly acidic soils. And then spirea, which is kind of a woody, low-growing shrub that's really common here as well. This area had really good road access, and the soil conditions, as I said, these are predominantly muck soils, sandy muck soils, high groundwater. When it's wet, it's really wet. When it's dry, it can be powder. So with this, one of the other things that we learned was, well, I can't run an energizer, a small energizer with one battery and have them replace that. So we did a solar energizer system, which the grazer also helped us figure out how to do that, what size to get, etc. So he was really the instrumental in getting some of the basic logistics, helped figure it out for the stuff beyond, like, I know how to put a fence. Water, and this is such a big deal because on this project, cows need water and they drink a lot of water, right? So very important. With daily moves, we needed many watering spots. We did not want to rely on ponds because he preferred not to water out of ponds. So we installed a sandpoint well. Luckily, we can do that here fairly easily because we don't have any ground rock layer. It's sand and muck, so, and about 7 feet to water. So we installed a sandpoint, had a gas-powered pump hooked up to that, and we pumped into these large 2,500-gallon tanks that would give us what we hoped was a head pressure to gravity flow, because we had to gravity flow about a mile on fairly flat terrain. The math said it would work, but real life always throws in some surprises. So we found out that first summer in June, it got warm. That 1-inch pipe that was laying on the ground heated up, and the oxygen bubbles, that water did not really flow downhill anymore. So early July that first year, we did install a second point well, second 2,500-gallon holding tank, dirt hill, and then things worked much better, thankfully. But that was a pretty stressful. That was the first moment that I wondered, what am I doing? What have I gotten myself into? Because we had some emergency water runs. We've got 200-gallon tanks that we use for when we do prescribed fire in the spring. We did a couple runs where we filled those up at our office and then brought them out to the pasture just to fill the gap in the heat of the day a couple times before our cattle could get moved where there was water flowing. So like I said, that was probably the most stressful because we're not dealing with equipment that might break down. We're dealing with living animals. So a pretty big deal for me. Let's see, additionally, other things about water. This individual ran cow-calf pairs. So surprise to me, height of water tanks matter. If his calves in early June are not that big, they need to be able to get to water. Well, they don't have big water needs because they're still getting milk from mom. It is important. Additionally, we started out with a couple 1,000-gallon tanks and some 500-gallon watering tanks, and we were moving these down the center line of the pasture. That was a bit work intensive, and those things are kind of heavy. So lots of bumps, but along the way this first year, but nothing insurmountable is what I would say. But for me, like this water issue was the biggest because it's extremely important for animal welfare. So we started, that was 15, and then 16, we kind of went about business, same as usual, daily moves. In the spring of 2017, made the commitment, things are going well. We put in a well and buried the water line. So the grazer helped with burying the water line. He had a farmer that he had worked with the county. We borrowed a homemade tool to bury a water line, hook that up to our tractor, and we were off to the races. After trying a few other means to get water, we just settled on, well, we're making the investment here. We purchased 500-gallon water tanks and had them scattered throughout that center line of the pasture, so we didn't have to move those when cattle moved, which decrease the input further in terms of time. When animals are getting moved every day, time is money, right, for these farmers. So that was important. And at this point, DNR and as the habitat manager there, I was basically saying, okay, while we're making this infrastructure commitment, this area is likely going to be grazed. Like, that's the primary habitat management tool that we're going to use here because we're making all this infrastructure investment. And that has been the case and will continue to be the case. Additionally, because of that commitment, we expanded in 2018, right before I left the property, we expanded the acreage on this to 720 acres. Just because we had the infrastructure there, so we've made some increases, but mostly that encompassed the infrastructure that we had put in 17. Also around this time, like I said, I learned a lot more about animal well-being than I anticipated. Rather than just the habitat stuff, I learned a lot about animal, like how to judge full rumens and animal condition. So that was really helpful. And I went through, NRCS has a grazing plan technical writing training. So I went through that. And that was also really beneficial and gave some of the science and like the numbers behind stocking rates and things of that to, again, help me be a better habitat manager and specific to grazing, a grazing manager on public lands, essentially, is what I would say. Let's see. So that kind of covers the logistics in a very quick fashion here. The cool stuff and the big reason why we wanted to do this was changes in habitat. So just some observations that we made. Again, we were mostly doing daily moves. I think by the time, so 15, 16, 17, I think 18, we switched to every other day moves, just for ease for the farmer, and we felt we were getting a better reaction with as good of a impact with every other day moves. So some of the observations, and I wish I could say that I did a bunch of really technical statistics research gathering, but that is not, I am not a researcher. I do not like to do research. I am very much a hands-on observational habitat manager. So that's what and I went out with my bird dogs, so we did our own little field surveys. So that's what I'm basing a lot of the of my observation, of my experience on. So those first couple of years, we were seeing just that, already seeing the diversity in structure and densities, which that was the goal. And obviously, when you introduce a grazing animal into a system, you're going to get that. And we didn't get any areas that were just like golf course tight to the ground, which we didn't really want. There was adjacent pastures that were grazed pretty tight. And aside from, areas where there's lecking areas for prairie chickens, that was not really the goal. So we were getting that diversity of structure and density. The first couple years started seeing more flowers that I hadn't seen before, whether they weren't there or the other vegetation was just so dense I couldn't see them, but we were starting to see different species of wildflowers. I think 2017 was like a banner year for, oh my goodness, common milkweed. And there were monarchs everywhere out in that pasture. So that was a really cool observation. And not just the habitat, but that the wildlife was there as well, utilizing that area at the same time as the cattle were utilizing the area. So in 2018, that picture on the left, that's the grass heights that, Robel pole reading at a nest site that one of the summer technicians that I had working with me found. Found it with eggs still intact. We went back a couple weeks later and all the eggs had hatched. So we don't know if the brood survived long, but we do know it was a successfully hatched prairie chicken nest, which frankly was super, super duper exciting to know that while the cattle were in there, they were grazing in such a way that allowed this nest to successfully hatch and fledge. That same year, probably about a quarter mile away, we also observed another young brood using the pasture small enough that in talking to some of our bird experts that they likely fledged in that pasture as well. So it could have been the birds from that nest. Maybe it was another nest. I like to think it was multiple nests that year. So, and we had rolling dung beetles, which is that lower right picture, something I didn't know we had in Wisconsin, but that was really exciting. I have some video of them. So that's always something I like to share too. Again, just not something I thought I'd ever see here. It was a beetle rolling a sphere of cow poo. So, and then the other like really impactful things is his cattle, they were eating the brush. And because he ran cow calf pairs, you know, the calves from this first year, the heifer calves eventually grow up and they have calves of their own, and then they teach their calves. So it's subsequent, you know, cows teaching calves what is edible. So they were eating things other than just grass because they had learned that it was palatable and might have provided something, some nutrients that grass wasn't, or, you know, nutrients that they were looking for. So that was the really, those habitat changes were really encouraging, especially that successful nest. So that just energized and I think, you know, helped to sell the story to some that might have been skeptical of if this can do both. So that's the other challenge and you know, thing that we were considering is, well, how do we, some local view this property as it's just grassland. There's nothing there because you can't see anything. They don't see prairie chickens. So that was something we were trying to improve. The rancher that we were working with, because he was a county grazing specialist in the county to the north, he had this network of farmers and grazers that he knew, that he worked with on a regular basis. You know, a lot of trust developed in that network. So he utilized his contacts and the outreach arm of his grazing specialist position to kind of help shine a light on this project. He initiated, we had a pasture walk every summer from the start in 2015 through when I was there. And several farmers from the area came out, farmers and grazers that I had worked with in a continuous grazing capacity on the property attended. So, and then additionally, DNR staff that were interested or like, hey, what's this new thing going on here? Maybe I've got a neighbor, maybe I can do this. So the pasture walks were always in the evening to accommodate those folks that have a job off farm, which many grazers do, frankly. And they really helped me to get to know folks in the area, just the mentality out there about grazing. And it was really nice to see those that were interested in this more management intensive grazing and that cared about the habitat. They got it, or if they didn't get it, they got it after, you know, going for a walk out there. So that was really exciting to see. It was really great to see people get engaged in what we were doing. And then you know, there was frequently folks attending that, you know, came every year, but then every year it seemed that there would be new faces, and that was really encouraging as well. Additionally, we did in the Bureau of Wildlife Management, we have a we call a wildlife leadership team. And this is our bureau director, assistant bureau director, and then big supervisors of the districts and different programs. So in 2015 or 16, they came out as part of one of their monthly meetings, met the rancher out there, and shared with them, shared with our DNR leadership what we're doing here. At this time, we did not have any structured conservation grazing program, conservation grazing plan in place in Wisconsin. This was very much a grassroots project from the start, from a habitat manager's perspective of, I think this can do good things. My supervisor was very supportive and basically said, go forth and do good things. So I had the reins to do it and I had the support. And then we just worked to reach out to that leadership team to help educate them and ideally garner more support for this habitat management method as well. We did some articles in with Natural Resources magazines, Wisconsin Natural Resources magazine, Ag Today. So just folks that would come, journalists, whatever, occasional articles, and that also helped draw attention to and hopefully gain an appreciation for these public lands in this part of the state. So yeah, trying to think, I think that's pretty much that. So that was basically 2014 to 2018. In end of 2018, early 2019, I started as a biologist in Adams County. So the county south of Buena Vista, Leola Wildlife Area is also another property that we manage for prairie chickens. And I wanted to mention this one really briefly because I thought, well, shoot, I've been grazing since 2014. I got 5 years under my belt. I really know what I'm doing. I want to try something new. So the previous biologist had started down this road where he had decided he wanted to graze an area. You could see it's a lovely field of combination of stinging nettle, smooth brome, reed canary grass, giant ragweed, if I didn't say that. There's and yes, so not the greatest or most desirable habitat, but again, these are really hydric soils. That's why the nettles like it there. The goldenrod, the giant ragweed like it there. So this was the new challenge. So in January 2019, when I got to this position that I'm currently in, I started by rewriting the plan that had been started for this pasture. Went to just simplified things quite a bit. It was 450 acres. There's 2 lateral ditches running through it. And I just wanted to keep things simple. So the strategy I took was a bit different. Instead of like a rotational grazing, I went back to my continuous grazing roots and I said, I want to hit this area hard. I want to graze it at a really high stocking rate for a short duration. So I had to put this out for bid because of the attention being paid to grazing. I had talked with a few grazers that I had met through the process, let them know this was coming up. Actually talked with one about the regime that might work, as he'd been grazing in this part of Adams County for a while. So I went with this really high stocking rate, short duration, May through July 31 grazing system. Back up. 5-year agreement. That's what the first 2 years are going to be. Short duration, high intensity. In May 2020, that's kind of a big year. So there were some challenges logistically because we weren't allowed out in the field at the start of spring. So right off the bat, we're starting with some hiccups, but nothing, again, that is insurmountable. I let him put the cattle out a little bit earlier in the contract, but just to kind of ease that hauling burden, I I like to be as flexible and fair as I can be when I'm working with this within the bounds of what I think will also meet my objectives. So that spring turned out to be really kind of cold, kind of cool, not great grass growth early, which not awesome. And that first year stunk. It pretty much looked like this picture through May, June, and July. So I was worried about the public perception. I was worried about in my gut, I knew the grass would recover. This is rhizomatous grass. 1 year is not gonna make or break it. So I knew that, but still, I was super stressed, wondering again, what have I gotten myself into? But they ate the nettle, they ate the giant ragweed because you can see there's not much else to eat. So yay, it looks bad, but it might have helped achieve those objectives of reducing that nettle and that giant ragweed. So, and then come September of that same year, cattle had been off just about a month. We have the grass is growing back. You can see a little bit of nettle there in the foreground, but okay, it doesn't look like a barren grassland. We'll be okay. 21 average growth year, early spring warm up in April. Grass was up to 8 inches, put them in April 20th, and then we proceeded to have multiple frosts in May. And I am thinking to myself, I've just done it again. Why do I keep doing this? We put them in too early. It's spring in central Wisconsin. We always get frost in May. But so it was a little bit of a rough start, but then by June, things had kind of settled out and we had, you know, a quote unquote average May, June, and July, decent steady rain, normal temps. And pasture looks similar to this through most of the grazing season. So I was really, really happy about how things turned out. The grazer was really happy with his gain, 2 pounds a day. And then, so it was a pretty decent year. We had a deluge of rain on August 7th. And luckily his animals were pulled out like shortly thereafter because we had a lot of standing water. But and then 2022, kind of just average growth year. We opted for continuous grazing again, a little lighter stocking rate for the whole season, May through October 15th. Unfortunately, the cattle that he ran steers, the cattle that came in that year came in with pretty low fitness. So it was again a large pasture, couple watering holes, a lot of walking. So he had some challenges this year just with the condition that the cattle were in. Nothing that we had done on the landscape, but just the condition of the cattle. So that's still frustrating because I want these folks to be successful. And then in 2023, we opted to do a kind of rotation where we split this 450 acres into 5 paddocks, and then we rotated through those paddocks for most of the season. Here in Wisconsin, we had a very severe drought. So things just got a little tight come August and September. You know, we always get the summer slump, but luckily this year it was a bit challenging. Not just with the grass growth, because as you can see here in June, we were looking really good. And with the lighter rate and the rotation, we had a lot of stockpiled forage ahead of them. So that really saved us. And we didn't get too far below that grazing height residual that I wanted left. So that wasn't necessarily the big stressor. This year in 2023, like I said, we watered out of watering holes and our groundwater was just getting lower and lower and lower. And we had the ponds cleaned out, but at what point do I say, I can't keep digging the groundwater because we're just going to keep digging a digger hole and it's not feasible to continue to do this. So that was a struggle that I did not anticipate having. I figured, well, the forage will be gone because it's dry, and then that's when we ask them to destock or pull animals out completely based on that. But this water hole condition and quality and depth, I did not anticipate that. So there's always something to learn, right? So this year, that's what I learned this past growing season. Um, so what to expect? What I learned are many things. Basically, to expect surprises, to expect the unexpected. Things like infrastructure. To a certain degree, humans, we can manage the infrastructure. If a pump is broken, we can fix that. It's stressful and it's time and money, but that's stuff we can fix. Weather and people and how people react, those aren't always necessarily things that we definitely can't control the weather. We're going to continue to get these high, heavy rain events that we experienced in 2022, right before the cattle were pulled out. Droughts like this year, we can't control that. And then the people aspect, we now have to put everything out for bid. So we really hope that we get quality grazers that will work with us on these projects. But that can be an unknown and that can be challenging. I've been pretty fortunate with those that I have worked with, have been really, really great to work with. And then what I will say is communicate early, communicate often. I still struggle with this. I am an introvert at heart. I would just like to go out and look at the cows every day and not talk to the cow's owner, but I can't do that. And just understanding that everyone has different preferences for how they communicate, whether that's email, phone call, text, meeting in person. And you might have to adjust yours. I have had to adjust my communication style to meet others to make things go smoothly. So I think that's really important. And then be fair, be kind, be flexible. Sometimes my flexibility has bit me in the butt, but nothing, again, that has been catastrophic or has really done damage per se. So that's been the other take home for me, is just besides that communication, which is just critical, and understanding different styles of communication. It's just I always, adaptive management is key for me, but just to be flexible with people, be kind to people, and just truly listen. So those are the big drivers for me and my experiences. So with that, I think we'll take questions, and this is my contact info should anybody want to reach out, and I'm more than happy to talk grazing and cows and that whole thing. So thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you, Erin. That was great. So much context information and just years and years and years of experience you have. So thank you for sharing that with us, and also just really good life advice. I felt at the end there, just like communicate, be flexible, meet people where they're at. Um, so I appreciate that. And we have a couple questions in the chat. I know that there's just about a minute left in the webinar, but I'm happy to stay on and answer questions. And Erin, if you have a few extra minutes um, to chat with folks. I see one question in here about Erin, how do you handle liability insurance?
Oh, so I didn't talk at all about our contracts that the department has because I don't like paperwork. But within our grazing contract, there are requirements in there for, department is not liable, and it basically spells it out in that contract. So I don't have it in front of me, or else I would kind of go through it better. But every grazer, anybody who uses state land, has to sign this contract, removing the department from liability, essentially.
Okay, gotcha. Another good question in here is vegetation monitoring possible to do over time to track species diversity and other things?
So I'm sure it is.
Mhm.
I ha I am not, I never took any courses on how best to do that in college. I don't like to do that. And within department, a lot of that monitoring and how we monitor falls on the property managers. And this is one of many properties and many projects that I work on, which is totally an excuse, but it's just the reality of where our department is. What I do a lot of is photo points. So I
Mhm.
have, like you've noticed on some of those pictures, I number fence posts and then I take
Mhm.
pictures throughout the season. I take pictures. So I have pictures of that number 2 fence post from 2020 through this year. So I'll continue to do that. And I also have a few points within the pasture that I've done not a Dobbenmeyer grid, but a Robel pole reading at those random points in the pasture. So it's minimal, and we would love to be able to do more. It's just been
Mhm.
a challenge with other workload.
Yeah,
Yeah,
gotcha. So with more resources, time, staff,
yeah,
money, you could do it that.
correct. Yeah,
But right, I did notice your fence posts with the numbers. I thought that was very clever.
okay.
Um, to keep taking photos every year.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the same place. Another question we have in the chat is, what's the best way for people who want to graze on public land to, they put in what's the best way to explore that, but I think that means like, best way to find public land that's available to graze. And Erin, I know you said you guys put out bids. Is there a site that you use?
So Wisconsin DNR has a brand new conservation agriculture webpage
Ooh,
where cropping opportunities, haying opportunities, and grazing opportunities are posted. We're not required to do that yet. It's totally like property managers can choose, okay, I can get this out in time to be posted. So that's a resource that I can share with Kelsey if folks are interested and she can share.
mhm.
Additionally, just finding your county biologist to know, hey, do you do this? And are you thinking of doing this? Because I'm interested. That's what we've used most and how some of my colleagues have found folks that are interested. Is just that verbal or email, whatever communication style works best. Find your county biologist, and that can be found on our website, and reaching out to them. That's probably the best starting point at this point.
Awesome. Um, Thanks, Erin. If other folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Um, I see that Bruce put in infrastructure costs all you or your producers.
So they were all to most departments. The producer had sweat equity and purchased like the some of the polyreels that he used were his and step-ins were his to begin with. Some of the water tank stuff. Um, but yeah, on this project, most were the department's investment in infrastructure.
Gotcha. And I just want to say, Bruce, like I've talked to a lot of land managers across the region, and that depends on agency and state too, very much. So that's the
And
case here, but that could be different in
right.
Iowa.
And for a lot of these, there's also a lease payment, and that those dollars go into Wisconsin into a pot that is stays within our wildlife management program to get dispersed for other projects like this or other habitat projects. So that's also it's an income, but I don't like to always say that it's
Right.
yeah.
Hmm. There is a question here about the economics, who got what land manager and state versus grazer. And I'm wondering if this question is more about like how much you charge grazers, or because I know some agencies also do it a little leasing. Yeah,
Yeah,
leasing
so
costs.
it is variable. How we do things here in central Wisconsin is by sealed bid. So it can range anywhere from and it depends upon is it continuous or are we expecting daily moves? Because obviously that's time and money.
Hmm.
So it can run anywhere from $4 per acre up to $30 per acre. Um, so how we run on sealed bids is how we determine that payment.
Gotcha. And again, this varies
Yes.
state by
Yep.
state and agency
Yep.
too. Yeah. Any other questions that folks have? If you have a last minute question, you could also feel free to come unmute or put it in the chat box. Awesome. Well, Erin put in her information on the slide here. And I just want to say we have more of these webinars, the Land Leadership series. Lisa Kardash, who's also with Wisconsin DNR, is going to present next week on the 16th, yes. And then we will have two folks from the Missouri Department of Conservation presenting the following week. Both are at 2 p.m. And I'm going to put the link to register if you haven't registered for all three into the chat. You can also visit pastureproject.org. And just so you have it in the chat as well, here is my contact info and Erin's contact info. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions. This will be posted on the Pasture Project YouTube channel, and we'll also, I'm going to get the slides from Erin, and we can also send out the slides as well. Awesome. Thank you everybody for attending today. Join us for next week and the week after as we continue this webinar series. And yeah, everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Erin.